stopped and they turned and they looked. You see, you do hear what you listen for. God drafted Moses because Moses heard the cry of the Hebrews. He knew that cry. We were reminded by the Apostle Paul that all things work for the good for those who love God. Everything that happened to the Hebrews was recyclable. God could use it for good. Those who trust in God's plan for their lives just have to listen to God's direction. In the upper room on Sunday night, as I told you during the prayers of the people, we lift up the prayers that have come in all week long to our covenant prayer line. It is us that get blessed by praying for those prayer requests. And the reason is, when we pray for others, it is like a fertilizer to our own compassion. In our prayers, as we say the words of trust and faith, we also develop a stronger sense of compassion. The deeper we pray for others, the more compassion God has to work with within us. Every scrap of compassion in our lives makes us a possible candidate for the work of God. But it takes more than compassion. Moses had left Egypt. He had found a way out. He made his way into the Sinai Peninsula, into the wilderness land, and to the mountain of Horeb, otherwise known as Mount Sinai. His escape was a dress rehearsal for his people. They too would come and camp at this mountain. He was not only filled with compassion for his people, but he was also filled with options. And among these options was God's plan for Moses' life, should he choose. Moses heard God calling his name. And Moses believed God's promise that's in Exodus 3:12. I will go with you. I will go with you. What about you this morning? Do you believe that God goes with you? That God is there to give you the guidance and direction to follow God's plan for your life? Some are shaking their head, yes, that's a good thing. Others are not quite sure. The second point we're going to look at this morning is God looks for someone who can follow God's plan. We know a lot of us have problem following a map, let alone God's plan. So I may be speaking to me as well as y'all, and probably am. Helen Keller once said, although the world is full of suffering, it is full also of the overcoming of suffering. The ones whom God drafts for service are not only full of compassion, they also have the energy of mind and spirit for God to use them. We can excel in compassion, but God passes over us because that's where we stop. We don't take the action that comes out of our compassion. Oh yeah, we love our church, but we hold our breath when something needs to be done. We say yes to helping out with the drama ministry, but we breathe a sigh of relief when we're let off the hook. We love having a children's church. We have pride in our children's church, and we brag about having a children's church. And the children themselves, their presence here gives us a blessing. But we don't want to commit to be a teacher or a teacher's helper. We know someone needs a helping hand, but are relieved when we find out someone else has answered the call for help, and maybe even mutter under our breath, "Thank God." Wrong thanks. Moses is chosen because he could go back, and by returning to Egypt, he can show his people the way out. Remember, he had already done it. When Adolf Hitler rose to power in Germany, there was a young German theology scholar, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Some of you may have read his works. Bonhoeffer came to America during this time to teach and write. He toured the States and worked and taught until an older scholar by the name of Karl Barth wrote to him and asked him why he was in America when his German people were suffering. In response, Bonhoeffer knew he couldn't avoid the dilemma he thought he had escaped. He went home and he joined a plot to assassinate Hitler. Well, shortly after the failed attempt on Hitler's life, Bonhoeffer was arrested. And only a few days before the war ended, he was executed. Perhaps, though, it is because he returned home that Bonhoeffer's writings are known around the world. You see, he went back into harm's way, even into death. But in doing so, he showed us the way of God. During slavery, when a slave did not try to escape, even when the path was open for him to do so, but made the choice of staying with his family, his fellow slaves would speak highly of him, saying, "He grew no feathers." The slave knew of the hardship that would arise from him staying where he was, but he took the choice staying to help his family and fellow slaves. It took much more courage to stay than to run. He grew no feathers. Bonhoeffer knew that he belonged in Germany. Moses knew that despite his Egyptian upbringing and his Midianite family, he was first a Hebrew, and it was time to go home and help his people. Each of them looked at their options. They could stay, they could go back. They could run, they could stay. They could have been afraid of losing their life and not accepted God's way. But they made the choice of believing God's promise of, "I will go with you. I will be with you." And they proceeded with courage and faith. And they were heroes to their people. You see, Bonhoeffer and Moses grew no feathers. Do you have the courage to accept God's way for your life? Or do you turn away? Do you run? Do you grow no feathers? Or do you grow chicken feathers? That's the meaning of chicken feathers. With God going with you, you too can be a hero in someone else's life, or a hero for God in this church, or outside this church when you have compassion and you act on it. You too can grow no feathers. Moses sums it up for us in Deuteronomy